Great. Thank you so much, Lena. And just a quick round of introduction. I'm Caleb Gichuhi. I'm the Africa lead at Build Up. And Hussam, maybe you can also just quickly introduce yourself.
Hey, hi, Hussam Fatah. The
Great.
Sudanese Vice Admiral. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. One of our colleagues was supposed to join us, but is not available currently. So that's Megan. And yeah, if she joins, then we shall just have her on camera. Great. So I'm just going to share my screen just because we had some slides for this session. Let me just see. Sharing is not turned on. Uh,
I
one
believe
second.
they can share the slide deck.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Please. I think it's Trinidad. Next slide. Meanwhile, as we are getting ready with the slides, so one of the conversations we're going to have today is just focusing on how we are seeing change in the way that communities are organizing specifically around Africa, and how this is playing into addressing issues around online harms. And I think one of the things we've been noticing from, I think, since 5, 10 years ago, we started realizing that there are a couple of trends that were showing up on the digital space. People are doing different types of research, and then almost bringing this type of research applications into different jurisdictions. So saying like something is being researched in the US and then being brought into a country like Kenya to try and draw linkages about how this type of work has been can be applied or regulation can be applied. And we started realizing that while that was useful for learning, just copy pasting some of these solutions from one context to the other was becoming really problematic because one, there was no clear indication of under which circumstances these legislations were actually effective. So meaning like the political infrastructure of these other societies did not exactly map on top of African societies. But then there was an expectation that the solutions would actually map onto the same societies and then have a similar effect, which we've realized in the past couple of years that that has not been effective. So in this presentation, what we are talking about is how African civil society groups are advancing change and how we've been supporting some of these groups. And we'll be just sharing with you just lessons learned on that. And then we'll dive into a Kenyan case study and also talk about Sudan. Next slide, please. So the why is this important? So like I said earlier on, digital harms contribute to real life problems. So that I think is very clear. And then the dominant response has been mainly focusing on addressing the symptoms. And we saw a lot of there's a spike in fact-checking work, content takedown, where tech companies came and started introducing not fact checkers, but trusted partners to work with them to pull down platform and content that was harmful. And we also started seeing like naming and shaming of actors online. So all these types of responses to address online harms have been applied, but also with limited impact. And then also governments in many contexts, specifically in Africa, lack the willingness or capacity to hold tech companies to account. And what we've seen in some instances is where tech companies come into a country and they speak separately with government and have their own agreements separately with government. And then, they leave the country. And so when civil society tries to push against that, it's basically trying to work against this wall that is set up by tech companies and government engagement. And then civil society actors are often isolated when it comes to, content regulation. So it's like either tech companies want to work directly with government or governments themselves don't really want to address this because we've seen it being used to either suppress dissenting voices. And then the shrinking funding space, as we've seen in the past couple of years, has actually made some organizations, specifically civil society organizations, stop doing this work, completely shut down, and even pivot into other areas of work where they can get support. And then what we're also seeing is that collective organizing also offers some form of protection from government retribution. So where people work with, let's say, a document, a memoranda that is signed by a list of organizations as opposed to one organization has a lot of weight to push against government pushback and retaliation. So, and even sometimes even bring tech companies to the table and have conversations with them. Because what we saw, for instance, in East Africa was this isolation of civil society organizations by the tech companies to specifically talk to them about this is the content we want you to flag, and not necessarily working with them as a collective so that they can actually get the demands also of the civil society, almost like a one-way intervention or interaction. Next slide. So our approach is almost to try and address those issues in multiple areas. And this is what we call a local-led approach built from the ground up. So sustainable change in digital world has to be locally owned and not imported. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier. We are seeing, and not only even in the digital harm space, but across multiple areas of development where policies are being borrowed from one country where it has worked and then being implemented and then expected to work with the same efficacy. So the challenge there, like I said earlier, is those policies and bills and laws and approaches to addressing online harms are developed in a very different context, right? Context where sometimes governments are playing ball, they're actually sitting at the table drafting these things, or tech companies have a stake where they're worried that these states might shut us down, and they almost don't want that to happen. But then you flip that to Africa, you find that it's a very different ecosystem. First of all, like the way the communications channels are not specifically as broad as in other contexts where tech companies have a lot of share in the market capital. So for instance, in some countries, digital divide is still present, is still alive. So when tech companies say you are not even a percentage of our profit share, you're like a very small percentage, then you're dealing not necessarily with the issue of the law not working, but also how these tech companies see different jurisdictions. So we create conditions for local civil societies to basically develop their own approaches and advocacy. So convening and creating spaces where civil society organizations can start to think about what is really important for us to think about, right? So the world is talking about online harms and mis and disinformation and all that, but is that really the thing that we want to talk about today? Should we talk about just the fact that governments are shutting down our social media platforms? Because we're not seeing that across the world. We're just mainly seeing that in Africa. So before we even start to think about what to prioritize, we have to really look at what is really needed in that particular context. And then working through trusted local partners and listening before convening to avoid premature formalization also allows us to be guided by what these actors are seeing as the most pressing issues. And given, yes, some of these actors are going to engage with other international actors, but when they come home and they're really trying to think about what works in their context, then they're able to create the hierarchy of needs and say, this is the first thing we need to talk about. So we're not formalizing things based on what the world is thinking is important, but what that particular jurisdiction is focusing on as the most pressing. And then the other thing is also trying to stretch these processes to a way of working as opposed to a project. So like we've seen in the past, grant cycles shorten the impact of some of the changes or some of the programming that we've seen have potential, but then because the grant ends, then you don't have particular impact in a bill or a policy or a particular harm. So this type of approach that we are trying to do is one, bring the civil society together, actors together to try and see, can we invest in relationship building beyond a grant, beyond a project, so that when something ends, you still have a network of actors who can be organizing and trying to address some of these challenges, even whether or not there's a fund or a project to do this under. So we're currently working in multiple countries. So that's Sudan, Kenya, Somalia, Nigeria. As you can see, this is a clearly diverse context. Sudan is an active war zone. Kenya is a semi-democracy. Somalia is just recovering from war. So you have this different elements, because then if you just land in all of these countries and say, okay, we're going to talk about mis and disinformation, then you basically, yes, that is an issue, but is it really the pressing issue across all the countries? Next slide. So the way we've done this is we start with the country level work. So we convene actors at the particular country level. And this is foundational to one, understanding what is important, like I said earlier, to that particular context. And then after the actors have met, these are different organizations, then we're able to bring them together across each countries. So where Sudan will come to the table and say, this is our pressing issue right now because we're in an active war zone. Kenya will say, well, we are a bit more different from our focus because we are thinking about elections in the next year. So, but then there's something to learn about how everybody's approaching this piece of work, as opposed to saying, here is a law that you think, or here's a bill that you all need to focus on digital design or things like that. So the first step, what we did was cross-country convening in just recently in March, where we had a peer exchange and where there was also a research presentation, a short film, just to get everybody on the same page on what we were working on across different countries. And this is still in its early stages. And the point here is not necessarily to say this is a project, but this is an early stage of how we want to see how things will evolve over time and see what are the impacts of peer exchange learning, where you have different actors, not within a country, but with the cross country within a continent, learning from each other. Some actors in Nigeria saying there's a bill coming up in Nigeria, we want to provide input into it, talking to Kenyan actors and trying to figure out like, how did you guys do it? Is there any relevance we can borrow, any impact, any lessons we can borrow from what you guys have done? So I'll share with you a Kenya's case study, and then Hussam will talk about Sudan, just so that we see how this has unfolded over time. Next slide. So in Kenya, there is a Kenyan coalition called the National Coalition on Freedom of Expression and Content Moderation. Now, the context here stems from a piece of work that we were trying to bring to government to work on. So we had talked to Kenyan regulators about digital design and talking about like, how do you change the design of tech platforms? How can you push tech platforms to change these designs? And here again, we were riding on this wave of a lot of the things happening in the US and Europe and trying to see, is this really possible? But then the first thing that we just dawned on us, which again was quite surprising, the government just said, look, we don't even understand these harms themselves. You're telling us to talk about design for something we don't really understand. Can you tell us what is this harm? Because what they currently had was very anecdotal evidence about, oh, somebody got bullied, one person was attacked online, there was a case of hate speech in one event. So very anecdotal. And when you think about it, that doesn't warrant even the pressure or the need for governments to start moving to this direction. So we've then said, what if we provided you with evidence of how the polarization is showing up online before we even touch on what regulation needs to happen? Because currently we are using designs and processes that were based to address a particular problem in one given context, right? So let's say the DSA. So we've just borrowed directly and applied in Kenya. Will it really work? So then we worked with this coalition, which represents a combination of different actors, civil society organizations, tech companies, regulators, activists, researchers, higher institution of learning. And here we were saying, like, we want to find out what is polarizing in these social media platforms, which platforms are the most polarizing and why, and are people pushing back? So we implemented together with the coalition the polarization footprint, which they contributed to providing a lot of the annotation of the data. Because one, you just don't want to again put a research on top of the table to these different actors and tell them this is what we found, but you want them involved in this process. So one, this creates ownership of this particular output that comes from the footprint or the polarization research that we were doing, and it creates this evidence base to say, now we've studied this space and we are now able to say this is the direction we want to push based on what we found from the study. So currently, from the study that we did in Kenya on the polarization footprint, the coalition has taken this up to push for policy on a particular specific point on holding tech companies accountable for levels of polarization. And what they're thinking of is to do this as a annual study, the same way you have an index of transparency index around corruption to see whether corruption is reducing based on policy or some things that governments are doing. It's the same thing now that they're thinking about how do we create this measure in an annual, so maybe annually, where tech companies can come and say, well, we are trying to put in some measures, but instead of just believing their word for it, we actually have an index that can actually hold them accountable to say, well, your measures are not really working because we're still seeing high levels of polarization over time. So that's a conversation that we're currently working with the coalition, the Kenyan coalition, to address. Now, here, if you think about it, is the tool of accountability is a footprint. We are not necessarily saying we're going to have a policy, but we're telling the tech companies, whatever you're going to do, we're just going to measure it against this footprint and see whether it's going to be effective or not. So the other thing that the coalition is also doing, the Kenyan coalition, is also researching into other African coalitions to see where are efforts aligned and where are they divided. Because there is this conversation currently, if you're sitting in the African continent, you realize there's a digital rights conversation and there's a digital peace building conversation. And the question is, are they the same thing? Are they happening in the same spaces? And how, if not, how do we bring them together? Because they're all trying to address the same issue about online harms, but using different approaches. So this study that is currently being undertaken by the coalition that we are supporting is going to provide insights into how do we either align and support both of those tracks through these other coalitions that are happening in Africa to create change in online harm. All right, so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Hussam, who's going to walk us through Sudan.
Thank you, Caleb. Can we move to the next? Yeah, thank you. So, as Caleb was saying, we tried to do this in different contexts, and one of these contexts was Sudan. And we have to understand what's really happening in Sudan, because fundamentally, it's really different from what's happening in Kenya, because it's shaped with this unique situation that's been created by the war that erupted on the 15th of April 2023. So right now in Sudan, and as any other context that conflicts are running, we can see that the meaning of the word is changing by day, and what's happening in the digital spaces are affecting what's happening in the reality. And we have examined that through different cases that we kept on seeing in our social media listening reports, that we have seen many massacres that been justified in the online spaces before it happened in the reality, like what happened in Wad Nura in June 2024, what happened in Kanabi in January 2025, and what happened just months ago in El Fasher, and what happened also in Al Dain just weeks ago. We have seen this, that there is a clear connection between the online harms that's happening and the offline atrocities that is happening also in Sudan. So that's why we have come and try to convene a group of Sudanese organization. You can just move to the next slide. We reached out to a group of the Sudanese organization that works in different aspects that's linked to the digital-based Sudan, like Adila, like Sudanese Youth Network, like YCON, and the Sudanese Journalist Syndicate, and of course, Beam Reports. We reach out to these organization, and we try to convene them to discuss the digital harms that's happening in Sudan in the local context. And we build up. We were the facilitators. We asked them to come, and we just wanted to support them to help them to understand and identify what are the digital harms from their point of view, how we can address these digital harms, and how we can come together to work in a joint work so we can address these harms. So we come with a position paper, and this position paper were written by these organizations, and then after the Nairobi meeting that we had with the different organizations that came from different contexts, like Nigeria, like Kenya, like Somalia, and Ethiopia, we started thinking with these organizations about how we can move forward from here to another phase. So right now we have this position paper, but we think this position paper is a foundation for something more. And this thing is the digital de-escalation that we are discussing right now with our Sudanese partner. So the idea is quite simple, that if we want to discuss any form of de-escalation in Sudan, or ceasefire or truce between the warring parties, we need to start that by having an understanding of what are the minimum standards of the digital escalation on the online spaces, because in fact so that right now, if you talk about peace or truce or something, there's gonna be a digital mobilization against this idea, and this digital mobilization is being sponsored by the warring parties itself. So we need to talk about the digital escalation as a vital and as a very important aspect in any ceasefire or truce process that can be held by any yeah, within the different processes, because we have the quad, we have the content, we have different processes right now. So that's trying to have these talks between the warring parties itself and also with the civilians. So if we want to do this digital confidence buildings media between the warring parties, we need to support what can I call a broader peace efforts, and we need also to reach out to the technology, to the tech companies, to take a clear position um, uh, and take maybe a special measurements on what's happening in Sudan, so we can address what's really going on. So right now, the the working group, we are not calling it a coalition right now, so that we are calling it a working group. This working group is working right now together to come with this and come on a joint understand collective understanding of what are the digital de-escalation measures that we want to have, what are the minimum and minimum acceptable standards for digital escalation, as I was saying. Yeah, over to you, Caleb.
No, thank you, Sam. So very quickly, I know we have a few minutes left, but I think so. Here you see two different cases, right? One that has an approach using an index, a polarization footprint, and another one that has minimum standards of what the warring parties are going to agree to the online spaces. So I think the one thing, again, just going to reference back, is all these approaches stem from the ground up. So these are actors who are looking at what is important to us currently, what we want to do, and how can we work towards that first before bringing anything else from outside. So I think that is the power of basically working with communities or organizations or coalitions. Many people have different namings. In Nigeria, we were told, don't call us a coalition because that has really bad consequences, but it's just a group of actors who are working towards the same thing. So I think one thing maybe just to take away is to say that this work is going to be ongoing, and we're just thinking that this is it's not really a project, but it's a new way of working that we hope will also just connect with other pieces of work that focus on online harms. All right, thank you. Questions or additions? Let me check. There was a question on the chat. Um, yeah, so Omar, you're asking the idea of an index similar to corruption perceptions for digital harms. So yeah, where can we learn this? So I see Elena has just shared a link. So we have 3 blog posts that we've created on this, and within the blog post there is the polarization footprint for Kenya, and there's also the methodology, and you can see how we've done the basically the study in Kenya, and feel free to share, reach out, and also yeah get if you have any interest on learning more, we can share. Lina, your hand is up, please.
Thank you so much. Nice to see you, Hussam and Caleb. We just had a session where we heard about regulatory efforts, and I'd be so keen to hear from the experiences in these particular countries you're working in. What's the posture towards working with regulators? Where are they seen as a potential ally or not? If you can share even each country, that would be great.
Yeah, so very quickly, and maybe Osami can talk about Sudan, and I can cover Kenya and Nigeria. So in Kenya, the posture has not been adversarial per se, but has been a bit more laissez-faire, where this is not a pressing issue. We don't really think about this, or yeah, if it's good to have, but not a must-have. But civil society has been pushing quite a lot on that, and so bringing the regulators into this coalition, the first thing was to show them this is the harms that the the social media spaces are creating. So basically creating the agency by showing them the harms, and not just the harms on social media, but also how this harms the electorate. Because again, politicians are thinking on that wavelength. So this is hurting your particular electorate. So people who are going to vote for you in the next election. And this is how this can be weaponized. Now, that has pushed them to start moving into, okay, this is actually a tool that can actually be really problematic when it comes to election, and now we want to do something about it. So framing it instead of online harms, but these harms, this is what they mean in your society. Because online harms to them feel like we're not operating on social media, so you guys are the ones, the Gen Zs and the young people. In Nigeria, where we worked with engaged with the tech societal and a network of actors there, one of the things that they found out was there was not there was no agency again also from the Nigerian government to meet with them and talk about these matters, almost like putting them at arm's length and saying you're civil society and having this adversarial relationship with them because of the past. So I think that is an uphill task where they are not in this position we are in, where we've been able to create a network and sit down with tech companies. So for them is almost presenting them with bit-sized information of, oh, we'd like to talk about this piece of work, we'd like to talk about this bill. And currently there's an online bill there's an online harms bill that is being prepared in Nigeria that has created an opening for this network to start to engage. So trying to engage it from a public participation approach rather than we are going to tell you to do one thing. So I think those are some of the differences we are seeing in jurisdictions. And Hussam, what I guess maybe what are you seeing in Sudan?
Yeah, thank you, Carl. In Sudan, it's really hard to work with the regulators because there is nothing like that right now. We have the warring parties, we have the warlords, but what we are trying to do in Sudan is quite different from what's happening in Kenya because we are working with the influencers who are affiliated with those parties. So we reach out to this influencer. We start by trying to not asking them to change their political stance, but we want them to try to produce a depolarized content because as we keep observing, as we keep observing the social media sphere, so that we notice that those influencers are key and a very important, yeah, and they are creating this content, they are mobilizing the Sudanese against each other. So we started working with these influencers. I'm gonna say this, it's not, yeah, it's not something that we can say that the results are very significant right now because we just start working with individuals. But I think within the next month, as Caleb said, so working on the blogs. So in the next month, I think with working with these problematic influencers who are affiliated with the warring parties, we can reach out to those parties and we can maybe reach the goals that we have said that we want to de-escalate the harms that's happening in the digital space. So yeah.
Yeah, great. And also one other thing I just want to say to add is in Kenya we have taken tech companies to court, right? So there's also that other layer that has taken Facebook Meta to court on various issues. One on the case in Ethiopia that had this person who killed himself, and then also because of the labor laws under which they were using Kenyan workers to train the algorithms and social media platforms. So there is also that piece of work that is also running parallel to the online harms that I think also government is also seeing this as, it's a space that is coming up and almost trying to figure out what is a balance between the two that we're also trying to navigate. But I just say that all these things are unfolding, it's better to have this as a coalition rather than as an organization, just because of the targeting and that we've seen in different contexts. All right. We have 1 minute left. I can't see any other questions. Naomi, yeah, thank you as well. Great to see you here. See you on the comments. And then what else? Yeah, I think that's it. I can't see any unless I'm not seeing it. Yeah, let me see the Q&A. Yeah, I think that looks good. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, I'm just wondering, do I hand it over back to Trinidad or Lena? I see Samara is on camera. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you all and have a good session.